It's a mild January evening in 1941 in the hills of Kenya. Under a vast canopy of stars, an 83-year-old man sits by a flickering lantern, penning a final letter to the millions of youngsters who have followed in his footsteps. Robert Baden-Powell, the founder of the global scout movement, knows his time on Earth is nearing its end. In his letter he writes, "I have had a most happy life, and I want each one of you to have as happy a life too. I believe that God put us in this jolly world to be happy and enjoy life." These words carry the hard-won wisdom of a lifetime spent in adventure, service, and spiritual exploration. As he urges the young scouts to try and leave this world a little better than you found it, we are invited into a remarkable journey that shaped such a philosophy. Today in Holy Rome, we delve into the life of Robert Baden-Powell, from a playful boy roaming English woods to a battle-tested army scout on the plains of Africa, and finally to the wise Scoutmaster of the world. This is a chronologically woven tale of personal transformation, a story not of empires and wars, but of one man's evolving soul. We'll follow Baden-Powell through the crucible of his early adventures and military service, see the spark of a new vision at a boyhood camp on Brownsea Island, and hear in his own words how nature will show you how full of beautiful and wonderful things God has made the world for you to enjoy. It's a journey of faith, self-reliance, and the spiritual value of the wild, told through vivid scenes and Baden-Powell's heartfelt writings. So, grab your walking stick and compass. Let's be prepared to walk in the footsteps of the Chief Scout and explore the spiritual trail he blazed for us all. Our journey begins in Victorian London. Robert Stevenson Smith Baden-Powell was born February 22, 1857, the eighth of 10 children. His father, a professor and clergyman, died when Robert was just 3 years old, leaving his upbringing to his indomitable mother, Henrietta. She was a strong-willed woman, determined that her children succeed despite adversity. Years later, Baden-Powell would credit her as the source of his drive, saying, "This whole secret of my getting on lay with my mother." Her faith and resilience became the bedrock of young Robert's character. Growing up without a father, Robert learned to be resourceful and independent. He was nicknamed Steph by his family, and in many ways he stepped up as a leader among his siblings. The household was lively and creative. He played the piano and violin, drew sketches with ambidextrous ease, and even dabbled in acting, but nothing delighted him more than the call of the outdoors. As a schoolboy at Charterhouse, a boarding school then located in the countryside of Surrey, Robert's classroom wasn't confined to four walls. Nearby woods, strictly out of bounds to students, proved an irresistible playground for his young adventurous spirit. He and his friends would sneak into the forest, where Robert learned to stalk wild game and cook it over open fires, all while evading watchful teachers. One can easily imagine the scene. A nimble teenager crouched in the twilight among the trees, heart pounding with excitement as he practices silent movement on a deer trail. These early escapades in the woods were more than just boyish mischief. They were Robert's first lessons in self-reliance and woodcraft, the very skills that would later form the core of scouting. In his words, a week of camp life is worth 6 months of theoretical teaching in the meeting room. And even as a schoolboy, he was living that truth, learning by doing. Beyond woodcraft, the seeds of Baden-Powell's moral compass were also sown in youth. The influence of his mother's devout Christian faith and his late father's example as a man of the cloth left an imprint on Robert. He absorbed the values of duty, kindness, and faith in providence. At school, though an impish adventurer outdoors, he was also known for his good humor and camaraderie. Friends found him resourceful and cheerful, traits that would later define the ideal scout's demeanor. By the time he graduated, Baden-Powell had a solid grounding in the classical education of his era, but more importantly, he carried an inner confidence in his own abilities and a curiosity about the wider world. He was ready to roam farther afield, equipped with a keen eye, a steady hand, and a trust in God's guiding stars. At 19, rather than attending Oxford, like some of his brothers, Robert seized an opportunity that appealed to his thirst for adventure. He joined the British Army. Armed with the lessons from sneaking through woodlands and the values instilled at home, the young officer set sail for the first chapter of his life's grand expedition, a journey that would test and transform him in ways he could not yet imagine. The British Empire's frontiers became Robert Baden-Powell's classroom in young adulthood. In 1876, at age 19, he was commissioned as a lieutenant in the 13th Hussars and posted to India. Picture him now under the harsh sun of the Indian subcontinent, a curious young cavalry officer absorbing the sights and sounds of a new land. India exposed Baden-Powell to diverse cultures and the vastness of the world beyond England. He quickly proved himself an able soldier and an expert scout. In 1880, he was tasked with mapping the rugged terrain around the battlefield in Maiwand in Afghanistan, a dangerous mission that required keen observation and nerves of steel. Amidst the dusty plains and distant Hindu Kush mountains, Baden-Powell learned the art of reconnaissance, moving stealthily, reading the land, and thinking one step ahead of the enemy. These experiences in India honed not only his scouting skills, but also his appreciation for clever strategy over brute force. He began to see that knowledge of nature and the ability to improvise could often triumph over superior numbers, a lesson in resourcefulness that he carried forward. From the frontiers of India, Baden-Powell's military path took him across the continents. In the early 1880s, he served in South Africa, in the rugged Natal province. Here, he encountered proud Zulu people and was mentioned in dispatches for his good work in the field. We can imagine him sitting by a campfire in the South African bush, trading stories with Zulu scouts, learning how they tracked animals or moved silently at night. Baden-Powell eagerly absorbed indigenous tracking techniques and bushcraft. Decades later, training Boy Scouts, he would still recall these lessons, how the Zulu taught him to read the shape of a footprint or interpret the snag of a twig as a language of the wild. Already, the wilderness was becoming his teacher and a source of spiritual solace. Surrounded by nature, he felt, as many do, a closer connection to the divine design of the world. Where is there a boy to whom the call of the wild and the open road does not appeal? He would muse. In those early army days, he was that young man enthralled by the call of the wild. Baden-Powell's reputation as a cunning scout grew. By 1890, he was stationed in Malta as an intelligence officer, even using a clever ruse of disguising himself as a butterfly collector to spy on enemy fortifications, sketching military layouts into the innocent patterns of butterfly wings. This almost playful approach to his serious work revealed a core trait of his: ingenuity. He saw that strategy could be a kind of game, one where creativity and careful observation win the day. These principles will later be embedded in scouting, turning education into game and adventure. The School of the Woods was about to intensify for Baden-Powell. In 1895 and 96, he took part in the Ashanti Campaign on the Gold Coast, which is modern Ghana, and then the Second Matabele War in Rhodesia, which is modern Zimbabwe. It was in Matabele land, and fate brought a meeting of minds which would sow the seeds of the scouting movement. There, Baden-Powell met Frederick Russell Burnham, a legendary American frontiersman serving as a scout for the British. Burnham was a rough-hewn Old West character, clad in a big Stetson hat and skilled in the arts of survival. Around crackling campfires in the Matapos Hills, Burnham taught Baden-Powell woodcraft, the lore of the wilderness. He showed him how to find water in parched land, how to follow a trail that's gone cold, and how a simple neckerchief could have hundreds of uses in the field. Baden-Powell was a keen student. He listened intently to Burnham's tales of American Indians, cowboys, and the frontier, soaking up the romance and practicality of it all. One could imagine Baden-Powell at a dawn atop a hill in Matabele land, the vast African savanna below him stirring to life. Perhaps at that moment, as he scanned the horizon for smoke of enemy fires, he also felt a profound kinship with all explorers and adventurers who had come before. In Africa, he donned the now famous broad-brimmed hat, adopting the Montana Peak Stetson style Burnham favored, and a bright-colored handkerchief. These would one day become part of the scout uniform, practical and symbolic reminders of the frontier spirit. Nature was not only a backdrop, but a character builder, as he later wrote. We are not a club or a Sunday school class, but a school of the woods. His experiences in Africa were convincing him that the outdoors provided a superior classroom for forming virtue and vigor in young people, just as it had for him. However, these military campaigns were not without dark moments. War is a stern teacher. Baden-Powell faced life and death decisions and moral challenges as well. During the Matabele campaign, he was involved in an incident where a local chief named Ulwini, who had surrendered, was nevertheless executed by firing squad under Baden-Powell's authority. Though a military court cleared him of wrongdoing, the episode surely weighed on his conscience. Such incidents exposed the harsh realities of colonial warfare, forcing Robert to reckon with questions of honor, justice, and compassion. It's telling that as he absorbed woodscraft from Burnham, he also took to heart the ethos of the frontier scout as a gentleman, a code of chivalry in the wilderness. Years later, he reminded his scouts, the code of the knight is still the code of the gentleman today. He was beginning to envision a new kind of knighthood for boys, one based not on battling enemies, but on chivalry, helpfulness, and respect for others. By his early 40s, Baden-Powell had seen more of the world, its beauty and its brutality, than most people see in a lifetime. He had chased guerrillas through African bush, negotiated with tribal leaders, sketched maps in the heat of battle, and survived close scrapes by wit and grit. The adventurous soldier had become a seasoned leader of men. In 1897, he was promoted to colonel at the young age of 40, the youngest in the British Army at the time. That same year, he published a small handbook called Aids to Scouting, distilling his lessons on reconnaissance for military use. Unbeknownst to him, Aids to Scouting would soon jump fences, from army tool to boyhood treasure, but that transformation was still a decade away. First, Baden-Powell would face a trial by fire that would catapult him to fame and set the stage for his life's true calling. The winds of destiny were blowing toward a little town in South Africa named Mafeking, and Baden-Powell was headed straight into the storm. It's late 1899, and the Second Boer War in South Africa is raging. Colonel Baden-Powell has been tasked with a daunting mission: defend the remote town of Mafeking from Boer forces deep in the African interior. Outnumbered and cut off, he turns this challenge into a showcase of ingenuity and steadfastness that the world will long remember. The siege of Mafeking lasts 217 grueling days, over 7 months of constant threat, hunger, and uncertainty. But under Baden-Powell's leadership, Mafeking not only endures, it does so with an almost mirthful resilience. Inside the besieged town, a curious sight unfolds. Instead of despair, there's discipline and even good cheer. Baden-Powell understands that war is as much a battle of wits and morale as of bullets. With a twinkle in his eye and a flair for theatrics, he employs ruses to deceive the enemy. Fake landmines planted around the defenses, elaborate movements as if barbed wire existed where there was none. At one point, he dispatched a decoy armored train, loaded with sharpshooters, roaring out along the railway to startle the Boer camp. These ploys keep the besiegers on edge and earn Baden-Powell a reputation as a master of gaming the war. The boy who once played hide-and-seek in the English woods is now outfoxing an army. Each evening, he tours the trenches, encouraging his men with jokes and optimism even as rations grow meager. His unconquerable spirit becomes the soul of Mafeking's defense. Among the defenders in a group that catches Baden-Powell's eye, the Mafeking Cadet Corps, a band of local boys aged 12 to 15, too young to fight, who serve as messengers and lookouts. These boys carry orders between trenches, stand guard, and help in the field hospital, all for a mere pittance of cornmeal as pay. They perform their task with a cheerful bravery that deeply impresses the colonel. While he did not organize the Cadet Corps himself, Baden-Powell later noted how invaluable they were in freeing up men for combat. What moved him most was the boys' calmness under pressure and sense of duty. Here, in the crucible of war, he sees proof that young people can show extraordinary responsibility and courage, if trusted and guided. Decades of military service had taught him how to lead soldiers. Mafeking taught him that youth, too, could be leaders in their own right. This realization would become a cornerstone of his future work. He later immortalized the Mafeking cadets in the opening chapter of his handbook, Scouting for Boys, holding them up as an example of what youngsters could do with training and trust. On May 17, 1900, relief forces finally break through, lifting the siege. Mafeking erupts in celebration. They have survived the unimaginable. Back in England, news of the victory sparks jubilant street parties, Mafeking Night, and Baden-Powell emerges as the unlikely hero of the empire. He is promoted to Major General, and songs are sung about the man who Mafekinged the Boers. But amid the accolades, Robert remains reflective. He cannot forget the faces of those cadet boys or the many African locals who endured hardship during the siege. He has seen the devastation of war and also the spark of hope in youth. If ever there was a turning point in his life, Mafeking was it. The fame it brought could have propelled him to a traditional top brass military career. Yet Baden-Powell now harbored a different dream, one inspired by the resourcefulness of frontier scouts and the pluck of ordinary boys. He began to sense a calling beyond the army, to train the next generation not for war, but for peaceful citizenship, robust character, and spiritual strength. After Mafeking, Baden-Powell returned to Britain, a national celebrity. He was invited to Balmoral Castle by King Edward VII, who personally decorated him as a companion of the bath. In London, the press couldn't get enough of the dashing defender of Mafeking, but Robert, now in his mid-40s, stayed surprisingly modest about his achievements. In fact, he was a little puzzled by the hero worship. After all, he felt others had endured far worse in the South African War. Inside, he was processing a profound lesson, that holding on with courage and creativity in a siege had analogies in everyday life. People, especially young people, often face sieges of adversity, boredom, or temptation. Perhaps, he mused, what youth needed was a bit of Mafeking spirit in their own lives, a training to be useful, cheerful, and brave no matter the odds. This thought would crystallize soon. But first, Baden-Powell formally wrapped up his military career. He took on a couple of high-profile roles after the war, organizing a colonial police force in South Africa, then serving as Inspector General of Cavalry in England. By 1903, Sir Robert Baden-Powell was a respected military reformer, advocating for better reconnaissance training and warning that cavalry charges would be futile in the face of new machine guns. Yet even as he strategized about modern warfare, his heart was being pulled elsewhere. Something extraordinary was happening with that little book he'd written for soldiers, Aids to Scouting. It had found an unexpected audience. While Robert was off on army duties, teachers and youth leaders in Britain had gotten a hold of Aids to Scouting and were using it to teach boys observation and woodcraft. To his astonishment, Baden-Powell came home to find it had become a bestseller among adolescent boys. He began receiving letters from boys who had formed impromptu scout groups, and from educators like Charlotte Mason, who saw value in his methods for children. This was the revelation. The ideas and games that made disciplined, alert soldiers could also make curious, capable young citizens, if adapted appropriately. In 1906, another piece fell into place. Baden-Powell met Ernest Thompson Seton, an American naturalist and founder of a youth program called the Woodcraft Indians. Seton had been pioneering nature-based activities for city boys in the U.S., emphasizing Native American lore and outdoor skills. He gave Baden-Powell a copy of his manual, The Birch Bark Roll, full of forest games and Indian campfire yarns. This encounter was like a spark on dry tinder. Here was further proof that young people everywhere hungered for the call of the wild and could learn virtue among the pines and stars. Baden-Powell later wrote, "Fun, fighting, and feeding. These are the three indispensable elements of the boy's world." By fighting, he meant the spirit of challenge and adventure. He understood now that to reach boys, one must meet them at their level of adventurous imagination. A fisherman does not bait his hook with the food he likes. He uses food the fish likes. So with boys. As he quipped, if he could dress up valuable lessons in the garb of adventure, essentially a man's job cut down to a boy's size, he might capture the minds and souls for good. So in 1907, at age 50 and newly retired from the Army, Robert Baden-Powell stood at a crossroads. He had the credibility of a war hero, the energy of a man in his prime, and a head swirling with ideas to help youth. He envisioned a program that would build boys into men with strong bodies, keen minds, and generous hearts. The vision was grand, but would it work in practice? There was one way to find out: experiment, and for that he needed a few boys and a campfire. It is a summer morning on a little wooded island off England's southern coast. The date is August 1st, 1907. The sun has just crested the horizon, glinting off the tranquil waters of Poole Harbor, as a kudu horn bellows a strange, resonant call across Brownsea Island. At that primal sound, an African antelope horn blown by Baden-Powell himself, 20 boys stir from their tents to begin a day unlike any they have known. Baden-Powell, with a boyish grin under his broad hat, has carefully selected these campers. They are an eclectic mix: a dozen lads from an elite public school and 8 working-class boys from local Boys Brigade troops. It was radical for 1907 to have boys of different social classes living side by side, but Baden-Powell insisted. At camp, a boy is judged by his pluck and kindness, not his pedigree. As he later put it, the uniform makes for brotherhood, since when universally adopted, it covers up all differences of class and country. The seeds of a more egalitarian youth culture were being sown. The island itself is a natural paradise, 560 acres of woods, heath, and shore, safely isolated from prying eyes. Robert knew the press would be curious. After all, a national hero running a boys' camp was news. But he wanted freedom to experiment in peace. The daily routine he established was structured, yet enlivening. Each dawn at 6 a.m., the boys awaken to that evocative kudu horn call. They quickly tumble out for cocoa and some limbering up exercises in the crisp air. Then, assembled around a makeshift flagpole, they hoist the Union Jack and say their prayers for the day. To onlookers, it might resemble a military cadet camp, but Baden-Powell's tone is far from rigid or martial. He often joins the boys in their exercises, hearty and encouraging, and he leads a short, simple prayer, reinforcing that duty to God comes before all, even on a playful campout. Each day, Baden-Powell introduces the theme, which becomes the adventure of the day. One day is dedicated to observation, another to woodcraft, another to life-saving, another to chivalry and knightly deeds. For instance, on observation day, the boys might be sent on a trail through the woods, tasked with noticing and remembering every detail of animal tracks or odd noises, sharpening their senses. On Woodcraft Day, perhaps they learn to build a shelter from branches, or quietly stalk a rabbit, just as young Robert once stalked his supper at Charterhouse. Chivalry Day might involve Baden-Powell spinning tales of King Arthur and the knights, then challenging the boys to act out scenarios of rescuing someone or doing a good turn to a fellow camper without expecting reward, planting seeds of courtesy and kindness. Life-Saving Day could find them practicing first aid and improvised stretchers, learning that a hero's first duty is to help others in danger. The camp's program seamlessly blends practical skills with moral lessons, each taught through action and story rather than lecture. During the heat of midday, when English summers can turn surprisingly sultry, there is a mandatory siesta, quiet rest under the trees. Baden-Powell knows boys can tire and fray if pushed too hard. He wants this experience to be joyful and habit-forming, not exhausting. By late afternoon, refreshed, the troop engages in games, perhaps a spirited round of tug-of-war on the beach or a mock stalking game where patrols try to outwit each other using hand signals. Competition is encouraged, but always with good sportsmanship. Show me a poorly uniformed troop, and I'll show you a poorly uniformed leader, he would say, half joking, meaning that the leader must set the tone by example. Here on Brownsea, Baden-Powell exemplifies robust play combined with fairness. He joins in many games himself, a 50-year-old who can still scamper like a youth. The boys loved him for it. As twilight descends, the campfire is lit, and everyone gathers in a circle. This is the magic hour, campfire yarns, as BP calls them. With the flames dancing on the faces of these 20 boys, Baden-Powell holds court like a sage of old. He regales them with thrilling stories of his African days, how he once stood face to face with a lion, or the time he lived among Zulus learning their songs. He teaches them the Zulu Ngoyama chant, and soon the woods echo with a deep-throated chorus of boys chanting an African warrior song to their heart's content. The boys sit, wrapped as their heroic camp chief describes the courage of indigenous trackers or the cleverness of animals. Through these stories, lessons are imparted almost subliminally. The value of bravery, the interconnectedness of all peoples, the wonders of God's creation and nature's diversity. Under the starry sky, Baden-Powell likely touches on the spiritual too. Perhaps he points out the constellations, teaching a bit of astronomy for navigation, but also instilling awe. He might say, "Look upward, lads, at God's canvas. These stars have guided explorers for centuries, and will guide you too, if you are in their patterns." In one of his writings, Baden-Powell reflects, "We were put in this world of wonders and beauty with a special ability to appreciate them, and through it all, to enjoy life, that is, to be happy." Around that campfire, one senses he is not merely teaching outdoor tricks, he is ministering to the spirit of the boys, helping them find joy and faith under the open sky. After a round of jovial campfire songs and perhaps some skits performed by the boys, 9 p.m. curfew comes. Lanterns flicker out and the island falls quiet. As he makes his rounds to ensure each patrol, snug in their bell tents, is settled, Baden-Powell must have felt a warm glow of satisfaction. The camp was an experiment, and it is working. Class barriers have melted. The boys are healthy, alert, and brimming with enthusiasm. They've taken to calling him BP, a fond nickname Scouts still use. In just a week's time, he has seen mischievous city kids become cooperative team players, shy souls become confident leaders of their patrols, and all of them grow a bit tougher, wiser, and kinder. One highlight for the boys was when BP awarded them badges for their achievements, small brass fleur-de-lis badges he had made, an emblem that would soon become the Scout symbol. They beamed with pride in wearing these little tokens that proclaimed, "Be prepared." On the last day, August 8, 1907, the camp concludes with a hearty feast and a prayer of thanks. As the boys depart Brownsea Island by ferry on August 9th, waving goodbye to their beloved camp chief, none can fully grasp that they were part of history's first scout camp. But they know they have been part of something special, a camaraderie and sense of purpose they will never forget. Baden-Powell considered the camp a great success. It had exceeded his hopes. In his notebook, he refined the outline of a book he had been writing, now confident in what to include after seeing what truly inspired the boys. Baden-Powell left Brownsea with a clear vision and a full heart. His dream of a youth movement grounded in outdoor life and practical skills and moral values had passed its trial by fire. The scouting movement was about to be born, carrying forward the spirit of the little island camp to the entire world. Energized by the Brownsea camp, Baden-Powell wasted no time. In the fall of 1907, he poured his soul into completing Scouting for Boys, the book that would serve as the blueprint for his nascent movement. Published in early 1908 in 6 parts, and then as a complete volume, Scouting for Boys was unlike any previous handbook. It was part outdoor manual, part storybook, part moral guide, all rolled into one and written in an engaging, conversational tone directly addressing young readers. Baden-Powell's years of storytelling and mentorship shine through every page. He beckons the youth reading it to join a grand adventure. Are you ready to be a backwoodsman and a tracker, a knight-errant righting wrongs, and a friend to all? At the core of Scouting for Boys is character and spirituality. Baden-Powell makes it clear that scouting is not just about knots and camping, it's about what kind of person you become. He introduces the concept of the Scout Promise and the Scout Law early on. The original Scout Promise asked a boy to do 3 things: duty to God and King, help others, and obey the Scout Law. Notice what leads the list: duty to God. Baden-Powell, a man of faith, firmly believed that spiritual belief was foundational to a good life. In Scouting for Boys, he includes an entire section on duty to God that is remarkably ecumenical and heartfelt. Religion is a very simple thing. First, to believe in God. Second, to do good to other people, he writes plainly. For a boy of 1908, or today, he broke down theology into 2 clear duties: trust in a higher power and practice the golden rule. Baden-Powell further explains that a scout must have some form of religion. No man is much good unless he believes in God and obeys his laws. So every scout should have a religion. This conviction was not about promoting one denomination. In fact, he explicitly welcomes all faiths. He compares different religions to soldiers in different uniforms serving the same king. To a Protestant boy, he'd say, a Catholic or Jewish scout is your brother in a common duty to God, just wearing a different uniform. This was a profound message of tolerance and unity at a time when sectarian divides ran deep. Baden-Powell saw the Scout movement as a brotherhood of peace, transcending class, creed, and later even nationality. He also weaves in the idea of worship is not confined to church, echoing the romantic naturalists like John Muir and Thoreau, with whom our Holy Rome listeners should be familiar. We've done episodes on both. BP tells boys that God's work can be seen in nature. The Knights always recognized his work in the things which he made, such as animals, plants, and scenery, he noted. And modern Peace Scouts, too, love the woodlands, the mountains, and the prairies, delighting in the creatures and flowers they find. This passage in Scouting for Boys is a beautiful testament to the spiritual value of time spent in nature, seeing the Creator in the creation. Around campfires and on hikes, Scouts were to practice an attitude of gratitude. Whenever you enjoy a pleasure or succeed in doing a good thing, thank Him for it, just as you say grace after a meal, Baden-Powell counsels. Such simple, practical spirituality, say a quick thank you to God for that bullseye you hit or that sunny day for your hike, helped demystify religion for boys and integrated it into a daily life under the open sky. Beyond duty to God, Scouting for Boys lays heavy emphasis on duty to others, the notion of service. Baden-Powell introduces the idea of the daily good turn. Every scout should do at least one good deed for someone else each day, anonymously if possible. This habit, he believed, would slowly but surely change a boy's character from selfish to selfless. The real way to get happiness is by giving out happiness to other people, he later wrote in his final letter, and that philosophy was embedded from the start in Scouting's practices. In one charming story from the handbook, he tells of a scout helping a woman across a busy street. When she offers a tip, the boy touches his hat and says, "No thank you, ma'am. I am a scout. I can't take anything for doing a good turn." These anecdotes were like moral fables, inspiring boys to see helpfulness as a form of adventure, a chance to be a quiet hero in everyday life. Another pillar of the book is self-reliance and survival skills, which Baden-Powell saw as a means to an end, making boys confident, capable, and ready to face whatever life throws at them. The motto he chose, "Be prepared," encapsulates this. He explains that being prepared means you are always in a state of readiness in mind and body to do your duty. Whether that duty is saving a life, making camp, or resisting a bad temptation. The handbook brims with how-to advice, how to track animals, how to mend a tear in your clothing, how to administer first aid, how to send semaphore signals, how to survive if lost. To a boy reading it, it must have been pure catnip, a ticket to freedom from adult micromanagement, because here were the secrets that could make you as competent as any grown man in the wild. Baden-Powell empowered youth with knowledge traditionally reserved for hunters and soldiers, and he tied every skill to a lesson in character. For example, when teaching knot tying, he recounts how his native scouts in West Africa couldn't build bridges at first because they didn't know knots, underlining the point that every skill has real purpose, and a scout must master even the basics to be truly dependable. Crucially, Scouting for Boys encouraged boys to organize themselves into patrols, small groups of friends who would go camping, hiking, and practicing skills together under the guidance of a boy patrol leader. This was revolutionary. It entrusted the youth to lead youth. Baden-Powell had an unshakable faith in the abilities of boys, given the right ethos. "A boy is not a sitting-down animal," he once remarked wryly, recognizing their need for action and responsibility. By making a 13-year-old the captain of his patrol, he gave him real responsibility to keep order, to inspire, to teach younger ones, thus also giving pride and purpose. The patrol system became a key to Scouting success. Adults, the Scoutmasters, were there, but more as mentors. The real leadership and day-to-day operation was in youthful hands. This mirrored what BP had seen in the Mafeking Cadets and at Brownsea. Boys will rise to the expectations and do a man's job if you trust them. In his words, an invaluable step in character training is to put responsibility on the individual. He was effectively democratizing leadership training to every neighborhood and village through Scouting. Within months of Scouting for Boys being published, the effect was electric. Boys all over Britain started forming scout patrols and troops on their own initiative, exactly as Baden-Powell hoped. By the end of 1908, there were tens of thousands of Boy Scouts not just in Britain, but sprouting across the empire and even beyond. It was as if the youth of the world had been waiting for this call to adventure and goodness. Baden-Powell resigned from the Army in 1910, at the height of a prestigious career, to devote himself fully to this blossoming movement. He recognized a divine opportunity in the overwhelming response. This was his life's mission. Over the next decades, Baden-Powell continued to write and refine his ideas, authoring more books like Rovering to Success for Young Adults, and countless letters and articles guiding scout leaders. But Scouting for Boys remained the seminal text. By some counts, it ranks among the best-selling books of the 20th century, over 150 million copies. Its appeal lay not in literary polish, but in its voice of experience and enthusiasm. Reading it feels like sitting by BP's campfire, hearing him challenge you to go out and try these things, to embrace life as a great game. Baden-Powell's writing was suffused with a spirit of optimism. He genuinely saw youth as the hope of the world, and he approached them with respect and high expectations. He also had a playful humor that resonated. For instance, he included whimsical sketches in the book. A boy peeping around a tree at a grazing deer, or comical drawings of bad scouting versus good scouting. It made the lessons fun and memorable. He knew that a boy on joining wants to begin scouting right away. No dull lectures. Just dive into action. That approach, combined with a profound undercurrent of making one's life count for something greater, set scouting apart from other youth work of the day. By 1910, the Boy Scout movement was formally organized with Baden-Powell as its chief scout. He traveled extensively, rallying support and setting up scout troops in other countries. Notably, at a 1909 rally at London's Crystal Palace, he found a number of bold girls who showed up declaring themselves Girl Scouts. Realizing girls too craved such activities, BP supported the creation of the Girl Guides in 1910, led by his sister Agnes, and later by his wife Olive. The movement was inclusive from the start. By 1912, during a visit to the United States, he encouraged Juliette Gordon Low to start Girl Scouts of America. Scouting was never meant to be parochial. Its aim was global citizen building. In the years that followed, the spark lit on Brownsea Island grew into a wildfire of youthful idealism spanning the globe. Baden-Powell fanned the flames not through authoritarian dictates, but by inspiring local leaders and kids themselves to take up the scouting mantle. By 1920, a mere 12 years after the publication of Scouting for Boys, the movement had grown so vast and vibrant that the first World Scout Jamboree was held in London. There, amid the flags of 34 nations and 8,000 uniformed scouts gathered in Olympia Hall, Baden-Powell was unanimously acclaimed Chief Scout of the World. Tears filled his eyes as he stood before a sea of youngsters from countries that had been at war just 2 years prior. In them, he saw a hope for a new era of friendship. He urged them to continue meeting like this, in peace and fellowship, to learn that strangers are just friends you haven't met yet. The jamboree ended with BP leading all the boys in a rousing rendition of the Scout hymn, Gilwell's Song, and a united roar of the Scout cheer. This was the brotherhood of scouting made manifest, a fulfillment of his belief that the spirit of the Scout movement is international, yet local, uniting youth across boundaries while each still serves their own community. In Baden-Powell's presence, people felt an aura of kindness and genuine interest. Scouts who met him as youth often recounted decades later how he made each person feel important, asking them questions about their own activities. BP embodied the Scouts' Law's principles. He was cheerful, always ready with a joke or a song. He was courteous, treating the smallest child with respect. He was thrifty, famously patching his own clothes or cooking simple meals on campouts. And he was reverent, finding quiet moments for prayer or reflection even amidst busy events. He became a sort of wandering sage in a scout hat, visiting countries, camping with boys in remote corners, and advising governments on youth education. By 1922, there were over 1 million scouts in 32 countries. By 1939, more than 3.3 million scouts in nearly every corner of the world. Wherever he went, Baden-Powell carried his sketchbook, his sense of humor, and a missionary-like zeal for spreading the good news of scouting. Importantly, Baden-Powell's message transcended any militaristic origin it had. Though born from a soldier's insight, scouting under BP's guidance became resolutely a force of peace. He once wrote, "The Scout movement has no military or warlike aim. The aim is to produce healthy, happy, helpful citizens, and to develop mutual goodwill and cooperation." And indeed, at jamborees, scouts swapped badges and songs, not bullets. There's a famous moment from the 1937 World Jamboree in the Netherlands. Baden-Powell, then 80 years old, delivered a farewell speech in which he held up a simple wooden baton. That baton, he explained, was a symbol of the spirit of scouting being passed on. He urged the gathered youth from dozens of nations to carry the spirit of friendship back home and be ambassadors of peace. Having lived through 2 Boer Wars and the First World War, Baden-Powell's soul yearned for a more harmonious world, and he believed youth, imbued with right ideals, were the key. As he grew older, BP also showed an almost childlike appreciation for the wonders of life. At a scout camp, you might find the international celebrity quietly teaching a boy how to identify a bird by its song, or sitting by a fire scribbling a poetic thought that came to him while watching the flames. In one of his reflective moments, he wrote, "The spirit is there in every boy. It has to be discovered and brought to light." This captures his almost spiritual faith in the potential within each youth, a spark of the divine waiting to shine. His role, as he saw it, was just to strike the flint and let the inner light glow. In 1938, with Europe on the brink of another great war and his health declining, Baden-Powell retired with his wife, Olive, to Kenya, the land whose wild beauty had always held his heart. Even in retirement, he couldn't resist attending local scout meetings in Nairobi or sketching the birds from the veranda of his simple home in Nyeri, nestled against Mount Kenya. There he felt close to nature and to God. The two were always intertwined for him. He would wake to cool highland mornings, greet the monkeys that scampered in his yard, and perhaps hum a tune from his youthful days of the veldt. Though far from the halls of power, news still reached him of scouts doing good turns in war-torn countries, of clandestine scout troops keeping the flame alive under oppressive regimes. It must have comforted him to know that the movement was strong and would outlive him. One quiet evening in January 1941, at age 83, he added a final entry to his life story. The letter we encountered at the start of this episode, titled Farewell Message to Scouts. It was to be opened after his death. In it, Baden-Powell distilled his counsel one last time. He urges his young leaders to be contented with what you have and make the best of it. Look on the bright side of things instead of the gloomy one. Reflecting his lifelong optimism. He reminds them that true happiness comes from helping others, not from pursuing selfish aims. He encourages them to stay physically strong and healthy, to enjoy life fully as God intended. And in a line that scouts worldwide have adopted as a creed, he charges, "Try and leave this world a little better than you found it." That simple phrase encapsulates the duty to God, as stewards of his creation, and duty to others through service, that had been the twin stars by which he navigated. Baden-Powell signs off with the Scout's motto, "Be prepared," and adds, "Stick to your Scout promise always, even after you have ceased to be a boy, and God will help you do it." Robert Baden-Powell passed away peacefully a few days later on January 8, 1941. He was buried in a small cemetery in Nyeri, within sight of Mount Kenya. On his headstone, Scouts later inscribed a simple trail sign of a circle with a dot in the middle, meaning, "I have gone home," a final Scout sign to those who visit. World War II was raging, but the news of his death was carried in BBC broadcasts and letters to Scout troops in many countries, often delivered where war of occupation had disrupted communications. Scouts everywhere lit campfires in his memory, comforted by knowing their founder's spirit would live on in every oath they took and every good deed they did. In the end, Robert Baden-Powell's life reads like an adventure novel penned by Providence, a story in which a fun-loving boy, a daring scout, and a visionary educator were one and the same man. His journey was outward, across continents and conflicts, but also deeply inward, a spiritual journey toward understanding how faith, virtue, and nature all intertwine. He transformed from a soldier serving the empire to a mentor serving the world's youth, guided by an inner compass that always pointed to the good. What makes Baden-Powell's legacy so profound is not just the organization he founded, but the millions of individual lives he touched. Think of the ripple effects. The shy boy who gained confidence after learning he could start a campfire in the rain. The troubled teen who found purpose in helping elders as a scout volunteer. The girl in an oppressed society who found empowerment in sisterhood and guiding. The communities bettered by scout-led cleanups and service projects. All of them are part of Baden-Powell's living legacy, a testament to his faith in God and in the innate goodness of young people. In our hectic modern world, the Scout ideals Baden-Powell championed, self-reliance, kindness, duty, and reverence for nature, resonate perhaps more than ever. He reminds us that happiness is not made by what we accumulate, but by what we contribute. Each of us can, in our own way, be a scout in life, observant of the needs around us, brave in the face of challenges, and always ready to lend a hand or speak a word of truth. As we conclude this Holy Rome journey with Robert Baden-Powell, we remember his advice: to be prepared, to live happy and die happy, by sticking to one's values and trusting God. If you ever wander to Nairi and see the green hills where Baden-Powell rests, you might feel inspired to pick up a small stone or leaf, a token of nature, and reflect on the remarkable path of this man. He who played the violin and snuck into forests as a child later composed a symphony of hope that echoes around the world. He proved that one person's quiet vision, with a dash of creativity and lots of faith, can spark a movement that outlasts wars and upheavals. Robert Baden-Powell left the world better than he found it, and challenged us to do the same.